I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me is Patrick Wyman, and perfect timing on this episode, Pat, because I've just stopped crying about 10 minutes before we jumped on the line here, and I think I'm ready to start coping with what happened on Saturday, June 3rd.
Well, acceptance is the first step to moving on, Connor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what it's all about for me right now, is acceptance. That's what this episode is going to be about. The last episode was about me wringing my hands and hesitating about whether to pick against my sweet boy, the sweetest of boys, Jose Aldo, or to pick the second most sweet boy, Max Holloway. Then this episode is about coping with the fact that the second most sweet boy is now officially the sweetest boy in the world.
That's your hierarchy of sweet boyness is definitely one lens through which we could approach this fight. That's it's sure.
Well, I mean, in all honesty, no one else is going to supplant Jose Aldo. It doesn't matter if they beat him. But certainly Max Holloway took away a different sort of title from Jose Aldo on the weekend. And that momentum, man, it shifted, and it took a little longer than it usually does for Max Holloway. But when it shifted hard and fast. And Jose Aldo was not able to survive the onslaught, man. Once it happened hard.
This was a way, way more devastating loss for Aldo than the Conor McGregor one was. Because very simply, the McGregor loss is going to be worse for Aldo's reputation when we're looking back on the long arc of his career at the top, because it was so public. It was like a public assassination, you know, after basically a full year of Conor McGregor's, like, just a metric shit ton of McGregor's trash talk leading up to a 13-second knockout. Like, Aldo's reputation will always and forever be dinged by that in popular imagination. For Aldo as a fighter, this one is going to be way worse, because this was not, you can't chalk this up to a fluke. This was not like, it's not like an over-eager, over-aggressive Aldo just ran face first into a counterpunch. Like, he got taken apart as the fight went on by a guy who was the worst-case scenario stylistic matchup for him. I think that's clear now in the aftermath of the fight. Like, not that it was easy for Holloway or anything like that, but once he made his adjustments and got his reads, I think you could tell there was a distinct point at which it's like, oh, this is not going to go Aldo's way moving forward.
Yeah, well, Holloway knocks Aldo out in the third round, and that's all the talking we have to do about that. We can move on now to other topics.
I for one would like to talk about Vitor Belfort versus Nate Marquardt.
A fight, by the way, which I actually thought was fine. People talked about it like it was the death of fighting. It was two guys who knew they could knock each other out, who were both trying to do it cautiously. I thought it was all right.
It was not the death of fighting, but I don't think we need to pretend that it was like, oh my God, what a fun fight.
I enjoyed it. It wasn't something I'm going to write home about or rewatch anytime soon, but I thought it was fine.
It's the difference between, is this a fight that you will actively avoid rewatching the next time these guys fight when you do your write-up, or is this something that that I will rewatch for fun? You wouldn't rewatch it for fun, but you're not going to be like, oh my God, I have to rewatch Vitor Belfort versus Nate Marquardt for my next preview.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's not Walsh Kelly.
I would happily rewatch Walsh Kelly, but I do have a...
Fuck off with that. Fuck off with that. Now you're just trolling everybody.
We watched it for the MMA Depressed Us on Bloody Elbow, where we were rewatching bad fights in the way that, like a sort of a mystery fighting theater sort of thing. And it's fun to rewatch with friends, as fun as it was the first time, because it's... As Zane Simon says, Pat, Kelly Walsh is the only fight in history I can remember that looks like... two men tied to the ends of shopping carts being repeatedly pushed against one another. And that is not something you want to miss. There are bad fights and there are bad fights, all right? Some of them are importantly bad.
there's bad, and then there's Kelly Walsh, which remains the gold standard, not because it was spectacularly low volume or not that much happened, but because what did happen was so bad.
It was so consistently bad. It's great. It's a classic of bad fights. A classic. Okay.
And now look at Dan Kelly.
I know, right? Dan Kelly had one of the funniest, silliest, worst fights I've ever seen, and now he is on his hair and will soon be middleweight champion. We all know that.
That's funny though, because you remember how much crap Nikita Krylov versus Soa Palele got?
Oh my god! Well, it should have.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Jesus.
And yet both of those guys have turned in a remarkable number of fun and even semi-meaningful performances since then.
That's true. A bad fight is not always the end for fighters. It does not always make a bad fighter. We'll say it that way. Anyway, Aldo Holloway. Of course, we have to continue talking about it. Let's talk about, you mentioned just a bit ago the sort of momentum shift. As soon as Holloway got his reads and got into his rhythm, is something I believe you said. What indicated that to you? When the fight did turn around, what indicated to you that Holloway was starting to take over?
Very simple. It was when Holloway figured out that he needed to draw out Aldo's counters and then counter the counter. So Holloway tried a bunch of different ways of creating volume in this fight. He tried a couple of different hats on for size. They didn't fit, and then that was what he figured out was going to work. So he tried getting in Aldo's face. He tried leading off with a bunch of different kinds of combinations. All of them led to him getting countered. So I think his adjustment, what he realized was there was no way to not get countered by Jose Aldo. And this is normally, when guys are fighting Aldo, this is normally the spot that they get stuck on.
Right.
Is they spend so much time trying to figure out what can I throw at Aldo that's not going to get me blasted in the face with a nice left hook or an uppercut or a flying knee or what have you. Like, they spend so much time on that step that they never get to where Holloway got, which is, okay, I'm going to throw at him, he's going to throw back, and then how do I adjust to what he's going to throw back at me? That's what Holloway figured out, was that he could counter the counter almost at will. That Aldo did not want to be in extended exchanges with him, and that his defense, Aldo's defense, fell apart after that layer. So it's really hard to hit Aldo the first time. It's not easy to hit him the second time, but if you stay on him, then there are going to be opportunities. If you put 4 or 6 shots together after Aldo throws, then you're going to hit him with 1 or 2 of them. That's what Holloway figured out.
Yeah, Aldo's, I mean, we know, we both agree, Aldo's defense is sublime. It's wonderful to watch. He's got so many different layers, and it's so systematically put together. He never seems like he is out of position. But the way to take advantage of somebody who does like to keep their feet in place when they're moving their head and just execute movement after movement is to just continue feeding them things to react to. You keep Aldo reacting, the more things you force him to respond to in a row, the more likely you are to get a mistake. And Holloway, I think, first, I agree with you. I think he got Aldo out of position. I think he drew him out and then just made him react to things over and over and over again. It was just crazy because Aldo had, what looked like 2 very good rounds. He dragged Holloway into an unusually slow pace. For a guy who typically throws twice as many strikes as Aldo, Holloway threw fewer than Aldo in the actual first round. He actually threw fewer than Aldo did and landed a lot fewer as well. Ate some big shots. And what you said just before about most fighters realizing that they can't not get countered, that Aldo is going to counter them, and he's very accurate, he's very fast, he hits hard as hell. Most people come to one of 2 conclusions there, right? They either decide to press forward more aggressively and just try to pour it on and hope something good happens, in which case they usually get knocked out, or they fall apart and the volume goes away. And they, Aldo just sort of controls them and picks them apart. And I think what we saw here is not just a testament to Holloway's chin, which is obviously fantastic. It's not just a testament to his power, which is seeming to be a little underrated, but is a testament to how well he thinks. And that if somebody had to accept the torch from Jose Aldo, if somebody had to take it from Aldo's hands, don't we want it to be a fighter who can outthink Aldo in the cage?
That's the really stunning thing about this, is that it wasn't that Holloway didn't get lucky. He didn't just kind of stumble on this. Like, he was very obviously working through his options. Right. He was thinking both tactically and strategically the whole fight. And, I don't think you can overstate at this point just how good Max Holloway's strategic sense is, that he understands that sometimes you're going to have to lose exchanges, you're going to have to lose rounds in order to create the kind of situation that you need later on in order to win the fight as a whole.
Yeah, because we've been saying for a while, and like Dominic Cruz was saying this during the fight itself, and everybody knows Max Holloway gets better as the fight goes on. But that is not just a plain truth. He doesn't just get better. Like, it's not like he's incapable of throwing as many punches in the first round, or he's more durable later in the fight, or anything like that. It is that he gets better because he is compiling information throughout the entire fight. And the more data he has, the more effectively he can land his shots and evade the counters. And basically, over the course of the first round or two, he's usually putting together the perfect strategy to have a dynamite third, fourth, and fifth. And it's usually such a dynamite third round that they don't get to the fourth or fifth. So it's not that Holloway's just he just gets better because of some physical attribute he has. He gets better round by round because he's a very thoughtful fighter. And yeah. I thought maybe that might be his undoing here. I thought the thoughtfulness might force him into a bit of a shell. And I think it kind of did at first, especially because Aldo is such an excellent counterpuncher. He really did force Holloway to try a bunch of different things and ended up making him pretty cautious by about the start of the second round. But that, again, is a testament to how good and how smart Max Holloway really is in the cage, that he continued adjusting and continued searching for the tactic that would get him get the momentum back on his side.
Yeah, there is a distinct moment in this fight where Holloway could have lost it.
Yeah,
it's in the first round when he gets just blasted by a huge counter combination, and Aldo forces him back to the fence and lands just a hellacious Jose Aldo knee to the side of Holloway's face. And you can see at that point the fight could be over, and Aldo stays on him. Aldo lands a bunch more shots. The fight could be over at that point, because for most guys, that is exactly the point in the fight. And it almost always happens in the first round. Happened to Ricardo Lamas. It happened kind of to Chad Mendes when they fought the second time. It definitely happened to Frankie Edgar when they fought the second time.
It definitely happened to Chad Mendes the first time. He had no choice but to not come out for the second round.
Well, there's a distinct point where you realize the reality of fighting Jose fucking Aldo hits you, right? That you're in the cage with him and he hits you with something that is just so hard and so quick, and you're like, well, what do I do now?
Right.
And you realize the magnitude of the task in front of you becomes apparent. Most guys, no matter how good they are, and this is not a knock on the Frankie Edgars and Chad Mendez's and Ricardo Lamases of the world, it's a testament to just how good Aldo is, that he can make even the best fighters in the world at those weights fear him. He inspires fear. And this isn't the kind of Anthony Pettis or Junior Dos Santos built in, I think you should respect me kind of fear. It's an earned fear.
Yeah.
Jose Aldo makes everybody feel that.
He puts it in you. He puts that fear into you in the fight itself.
Exactly. And Holloway hit the point where he should have felt that, and he overcame it.
Yeah.
And there's a moment too where you can tell that he's felt it and he's overcome it, even though he clearly loses the first round. I think the second round he may have won it, but he did. But all three judges had him down 20-18 going into the third.
He definitely started to have moments near the second half, in the second half of the second round.
Yeah, there's a point in the first round where, look, in hindsight, you can see Holloway starts to figure it out. So he throws at Aldo. Aldo throws back at him and hits him with another big counter. But this time, instead of backing off, Holloway cuts an angle, he pivots around and throws a southpaw right hook at Aldo. And you can see at that point, Holloway is it doesn't land, it comes up just short, but you can see the wheels turn in Holloway's head after he throws this punch where he's like, okay, I got something here. Mm-hmm. And it takes him another about 4 minutes of fight time to figure out how to make it work. But you can see, looking back from the end of the fight, okay, this is where Holloway started to get his reads and started to get the timing and the outlines of the plan that would eventually work started to come together.
Just started to feel that Aldo was vulnerable as he was throwing, and that he had to get Aldo to throw, which is crazy, right? You take the fact that Jose Aldo is landing hellacious shots on you, and most people, as we said, will come to the conclusion that they just don't want that to happen anymore. And it really does take a special kind of confidence and intelligence and preparation, everything. It takes a perfect fight, really, and a perfect fighter to have that happen and realize that it's okay if he's throwing at me. What I have to do is make him throw at me when I want and how I want, and I will have openings. Like, to let Jose Aldo counter you is, again, not a thing most people can confidently do. And we're talking not just about average fighters. We're talking about the best fighters that Aldo has faced for years in one of the sport's best divisions. None of those guys have been able to come to that conclusion the way Max Holloway did. And again, he still had to, I think, drop 2 rounds. But, I mean, damn. If you can't finish him in the first and second, and he's going to come to that conclusion eventually, like, who the hell can beat him?
Just the balls on that dude.
Yeah.
Like, the sheer balls it takes to have felt Aldo's counters. Because he felt them. Aldo landed those shots, like, in the first round and in the second, too.
That first left hook, man, was sexy. Aldo faked the right hand, hit the left right in front of the guard, and really rattled Max Holloway's brain case with that shot.
Jesus, man. Like, to have felt those shots, to know what Aldo had to offer him, and to still think, you know what, okay, I'm going to throw at this guy knowing that this lightning fast, powerful, dangerous, sharp counterpuncher is going to try to hit me back, and then I'm going to hit him back after that. Like, just think through each step of that process, and you see, like, that is true greatness right there, man. Like, we have been Max Holloway guys for a long time on this show. We've been Max Holloway guys since, I'm trying to think, what was the first Holloway fight that we talked about? It was probably you and I both picked him to beat Cub Swanson back in 2015.
Yeah, I think I've probably had my eye on him really closely since the Clay Collard fight even. Like, that was when I really went back and looked at his other fights, and I was like, holy shit, this guy should have beat Dennis Bermudez. And I was like, okay, we have something here, you know?
Yeah. I think that was the first of the Swanson fight was the first of his that we talked about together. And I think that we were both pretty convinced that Holloway was going to be something real and special at that point, because he was a big underdog. He was like a plus 160 or a plus 180 underdog in that fight. And we both thought he would win that pretty comfortably. Yeah. So, like, we have been Holloway guys for a long time, but it's crazy watching him blossom against, again, Jose fucking Aldo in Rio with the crowd behind him. And, you know, maybe we should take a little break and come back to talk a little more about this, because we've still got a lot we got to go into here.
Yeah, there is a lot to say about this fight. We got to talk about Aldo's performance. We have to maybe talk about why his strategy looked the way it did and how Max Holloway may have managed to change it, and a lot more, really. What's next for both of these guys, and what did this performance really tell us about them going forward? So we'll talk about that after this break. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And welcome back to the show. Take 2, as both Pat and I try our best to ignore the sounds of leaf blowers, helicopters, motorcycles, really just the terrors of suburban life, both going on outside of our windows. You get the real stuff here when you listen to Heavy Hands, right? You get it's a slice of life. That's what this show is all about. It's
the pure shit. 2 blue-collar guys sitting at their microphones doing the damn thing, surrounded by the ambient noises of a world gone mad.
Holy shit. I could listen to you talk about that for a good while longer, but we have a lot more Aldo Holloway to get to. And if we are talking about this fight, Pat, I think one of the things we have to discuss is why Aldo approached it in the way he did. A lot of people online, even during the fight, even the commentators in the fight, were questioning why Aldo was throwing so few leg kicks. That was the thing that stood out to most people. Is that he threw 1 leg kick and got a little countered and stopped throwing. I think that's the answer right there, to be quite honest. I think that just knowing, or having at least a sense for who Jose Aldo is, knowing how much pressure was probably on him for this fight, knowing how dangerous Holloway is, and that Aldo knew that, that you throw a leg kick and get countered, that is sometimes enough for Jose Aldo to just decide to set that weapon aside, at least for the time being. But
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. I think that's probably the main reason. I think another one is that the basic context of the fight did not lend itself to him throwing low kicks. Mm-hmm. So this is not something that we have talked about all that much to this point, but the range at which the fight took place and the directionality of the fight.
Right.
So Holloway did a really good job of not selling out with his pressure, of not like trying to swarm and force Aldo back to the fence, which I think a lot of us thought he would try and do, given that Holloway is really good at that, like really, really good at that. That's probably Holloway at the end of the day. That's probably his core competence, is swarming. So I think a lot of us thought that he would try and do that. But Holloway did something much more subtle with his pressure, which he just stayed on Aldo, stayed in the pocket, and he did not give Aldo many opportunities to move forward. Like, I think he thought, going into this, I'm not sure if Holloway thought about it in these terms, but I would guess his general frame was something like, I'm okay with getting beaten by counterpuncher Aldo. I don't want to let Aldo be forward-moving Aldo. And that is when Aldo really digs into the low kicks, is when he's in open space, he's got plenty of room to operate, he's not being forced backwards. And Holloway pretty much kept Aldo on the back foot the whole fight.
Yeah, Aldo's main setup for low kicks is a jab. And he does that because he wants you to lean back and start to draw away. The moment you start to withdraw, you find it very difficult with your feet moving to check a kick. Your attention is drawn upwards by the jab. There's something in your face so you can't see what's coming after it. That is really his main setup. And he basically every other combination that he throws, or even every just naked low kick that he throws, it's all based on, I think, your expectation that it's all based on the pattern of him using the jab to feed you that kick. And that, again, the big reason for that is that you back up when he throws that jab. And Holloway didn't really back up. He was sort of inclined forward. He had his hands at the ready. And the distance of this fight, almost from the very beginning, which is yet another testament to how good both of these guys are and how comfortable both of them are, was very close. So much so that, Aldo was certainly in range to throw low kicks, but he was also in range to be hit while doing so, or at least to be threatened. And had to, I think, to maintain that distance, had to continually take little steps back, just could not allow Holloway to have the opportunity. I think even Andre Pederneiras, after the fight, he had a couple of remarks about what went on. Interestingly, I believe, I wish I knew the source for this, but he did mention, he thought that Aldo...
It was Gooey Cruz of MMA Fighting.
Okay, yeah. He thought that Aldo would change his mind about the stoppage being undeserved after he saw it again, which was interesting. But he also said that he didn't agree with people who said that Aldo should have thrown a lot more leg kicks because to he and Aldo, the position was not there for it. That the distance wasn't right, that Holloway was leaned forward, he was ready to counter, and it wasn't there. Now, personally, I think that it's part of Aldo's stylistic limitation, that a problem like that, he confronts a problem like that by finding a totally different tactic to deal with it. That I think that Holloway is still vulnerable to low kicks. And when you have the best low kicks in the game, it probably behooves you to find a way to make them work. That there were certainly, I think, ways that Aldo could have made the low kicks happen. But there's this feeling you get when you watch Jose Aldo that he puts a lot of pressure on himself, I think, to fight perfectly. He has, for years now, been a defending champion, and more than any other champion. I mean, we all know that keeping a belt is so much harder than winning it, but it's also a totally different kind of mindset required. And I think more than any other champion in recent memory, Jose Aldo has been defined by a champion's mindset. That he embodies this sort of the idea of defending a belt, of not being taken out of your comfort zone, of not even going into second gear if you can avoid it, of not being hit. Everything about him has this defensive feel. And while a lot of that is because Aldo has a preternatural gift for reading his opponent's intentions, I think, too, that sometimes because of that pressure, he kind of tricks himself out of his own interests. You know what I mean? I think it was a mistake for him to allow Holloway to convince him so easily that he could not throw low kicks, because they would have been a huge weapon for him. Like, that would have certainly gone a long way to help him, thwart Holloway's ability to dig in and land hard punches in the third round of this fight.
Yeah, there's an extent to which, and this is something that we've talked about before with Aldo on this show, that Aldo tends to accept the tactical situations that his opponents are putting in front of him.
Yeah.
And normally that's not a problem, because Aldo finds ways to turn those tactical situations to his advantage.
Yeah.
While Pederneiras is mostly handling the strategic thinking over the course of the fight for Aldo. So all Aldo has to do is process in real time, right? And that's what Aldo is better at doing than anybody else in the world.
Yeah.
I think shot for shot, I think Aldo is better at doing that than Holloway is.
I think
if you
the big reason that Holloway won this fight is that he's a better strategist than Aldo. But tactically, if we're talking in the moment, in the exchanges, there's nobody better than Aldo.
Yeah, like shot for shot, I think Aldo is the best tactical thinker. I think he's the best reader and reactor, not just in MMA history. I think by an extraordinary margin.
I would agree.
I think it's Aldo, and then everybody else is a tier below him in that regard. But that can also work against him if a guy like Holloway comes along who is so good at figuring out the broader strategy that needs to happen. Because it would not have been an enormous adjustment for Aldo to throw back at Holloway, or for Holloway to throw at Aldo to throw back at him, and then Aldo to stay on him. To not let Holloway get the next shot off, but for Aldo to use that as a turn of the momentum. Right. And then, so Holloway throws at Aldo throws back at him, finish that combination with a low kick, get back out of danger, and then get back on Holloway, make him stick and move for a while, try and control the flow of the fight a little more. But that's just never really been Aldo's game, and to some extent there was going to be a guy, not that was going to catch up with him. To state it that way makes it sound like it's some sort of inherent weakness, and I don't think it is. I think it's just a statement of fact.
Yeah, it's a style. It's just who Aldo is as a fighter. That's how his brain works.
Yeah, and there was going to be a point where somebody figured out how to make that work against him, and Holloway, I think, figured out how to make that work against him.
Yeah. And and again, as you said, it's not a given, because it takes a really special fighter to do that. There are lower level versions of the way that Aldo approaches a fight. Like, for example, Rafael Assunção, I think, is similar in a lot of ways, in the way that he thinks about fights. But is he as fast or as powerful? Is he as sharp? Can he react as perfectly as Jose Aldo? No, he's several levels below where Aldo is. Aldo is the finest tactician that MMA has ever seen. But that fixation on tactical thinking, on how do I solve this very specific problem in front of me, will always have an inherent weakness to somebody who is thinking all the time about the entirety of the fight, about why they should do one thing, and constantly being willing to set a strategy aside and adapt to a new one if it actually makes sense in the big picture. And that's Max Holloway. Now, could perhaps Jose Aldo have taken that shot a couple years ago and found a way to get back into the fight? We know he has further levels of aggression that he can tap into, at least for small stretches of time. Did it seem to you, Pat, like his durability had been lessened since the McGregor KO? I know a lot of people were talking about his chin being cracked. I'm not so sure. There's not enough here for me to say, because I think he got caught with a perfect 1-2 that just put him down. I think it would have put a lot of fighters down. But
yeah, I think that Aldo is still more durable than a lot of guys are, but he is not as durable as he once was. And if that makes sense. And I was talking to a couple of people, I'm not gonna say who, on Saturday night about this, and they're long-term observers of combat sports, and one of them said Aldo fought Frankie like a guy who, not obviously, but kind of subtly, like a guy who wasn't sure about his chin. Mm-hmm. And just the refusal to commit, even when opportunities were there, to really put a stamp on it, to really drive home that emphasis. And he was just such a bad matchup for Frankie, and so many levels beyond him, that it wasn't a thing. But I'm inclined to think that really, not that his chin is shot, but it's just not where it was, and that Aldo knows it's not where it was.
Yeah.
And a guy like Aldo who's so aware of what's happening and is so aware of his game and his capabilities that I kind of wonder what that's going to be like moving forward. Because this is now 2 fights in 3 where he's been finished by strikes.
Yeah.
So
after, how many years of, some of it too, again, like the 2 best strikers he's ever faced, 2 brutal stylistic matchups in a lot of ways. 2 guys with length and combination punching ability, 2 guys who can push a pace. And I think that there's a lot of reasons to think that if Max Holloway and Conor McGregor had come along 5 years ago, that they may have beaten Aldo then. It would have just been a bad style for him. But it's a little worrying when you watch a guy take on so many great fighters for so long, and then suddenly, within the span of 2 years, he gets knocked out for the first 2 times.
Yeah. Well, I think, just to bring it back to McGregor real quick, I actually think Holloway is a worse stylistic matchup for Aldo than McGregor is.
I agree.
I think McGregor is always going to have a higher chance of landing that one-punch KO on Aldo, but I think that McGregor's style, he's not like a huge combination puncher. He will throw combinations, but he's not the kind of combination flow guy that Holloway is. And I think that in that kind of fight, if Aldo could have taken the left hand, not that it's a given that he could have, in that kind of fight, I think he could have gone shot for shot with McGregor until McGregor slowed down, because I don't think McGregor can keep up that pace the way that Holloway can.
He starts faster than Holloway, and he's certainly more dangerous, although he did have, from the get-go, what Holloway sort of not stumbled upon, but he had the same sort of advantage over Aldo that Holloway found in this fight, which is that he was countering Aldo's leads, that he was a counter fighter, something that Aldo is. He's typically the one countering. I'm now, I'm a huge fan of Jose Aldo. I don't think there's any hiding that. But I think now, like, watching him fight, and who knows what's going to happen next. We can talk about that in a moment. I'm sort of probably experiencing what fans of, like, Wilfred Benitez experienced in the 80s, where, because Benitez never got the respect he deserved as a fighter. He was never included among the Fab Four, even though, he had a great fight with Tommy Hearns. He beat Roberto Duran. He was certainly up there alongside them. But also that if you watch Wilfred Benitez fight, it is some of the most beautiful boxing you will ever see. He is, like Aldo, like a supremely talented and skilled tactician. Everything he does is just art. But when you watch Wilfred Benitez, you're always worried about him getting clipped with that perfect shot. And it kind of feels like that watching Aldo now, which sucks, right? Like, it makes his wins really rewarding when you follow him, but it really hurts to see somebody as skilled as Aldo just go out like that. It's just a weirdly sort of ignominious way for someone that you and I both consider like one of the most technically skilled fighters in the history of the sport. It's an ignominious way to see him go out.
Yeah, and again, this is something that I mentioned right at the very beginning, but like with the McGregor loss, I was pretty confident that Aldo was going to come back from that and be fine, or fine-ish, that wasn't going to break him in some fundamental way. I'm less convinced that that's the case here.
Yeah.
Because he's been fighting professionally for almost 13 years. He's 30 years old. He's got a lot of mileage on him. He is 30, and he's been a professional fighter for almost half his life.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot of wear and tear. That's a lot of time. I thought Aldo looked fine physically. I thought he was maybe a little bit slower than usual, but
he was still hella fast. Yeah, he was still extremely fast. He was still faster than Holloway in the early going.
Mm-hmm. I thought physically he more or less looked fine.
Mm-hmm.
Skill-wise, he was every bit as sharp as we've been led to expect, and there are going to be a lot of matchups out there that like he could win those fights.
Oh, I think he's still head and shoulders over most of the division, if not all of it, other than Holloway.
Yeah, he could fight Frankie Edgar 10 more times, and he would beat Frankie Edgar 10 more times.
Sure.
Like I firmly believe that he would flying knee Dennis Bermudez's head clean off.
Sure.
He would win a clean, comfortable decision over Jeremy Stevens. Like he would beat Cub Swanson again. I firmly believe all of that, but I just do not see, barring a first round knockout, how he could beat Max Holloway. Like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick Holloway in that fight 8 times out of 10.
It feels weird, right? But some people compared the way this fight played out to the first fight between Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz. And in some ways, it kind of did feel like it. Like, did you kind of get the sense that Aldo felt like he needed to either hurt or probably finish Holloway early, or suffer the inevitable, which is, trying to match Max Holloway's pace down the stretch?
I don't think so. I think Aldo is. I don't think so. Though I think in broad terms, and this was something that we talked about before the first McGregor-Diaz fight, like it was clear from the get-go, or should have been clear, that was a rough stylistic matchup, right? And I think that in this sport, a lot of the time, we focus a lot more on the fighters themselves than on how the puzzle pieces fit together. Like, and this is like, they're just guys who are tough for each other. That's just the way that they're built, And like, you think about these guys' preferred fights, and like, Aldo is just not designed. He is not built to fight Holloway's kind of fight, in the same way that, maybe he's not built to fight McGregor's kind of fight. Whereas Aldo is built from the ground up to just fucking destroy the Frankie Edgars of the world.
Sure.
Guys who need the takedown, guys who are not especially tall, guys who are not like a big one-hitter quitter type of thing, who like to stick and move. Like, Aldo is always going to win those fights because that's what Aldo is designed to do.
Yeah, Aldo will go in there and lose to Max Holloway a second time, and probably still after that have a better shot than almost anybody else in the UFC of beating Khabib Nurmagomedov. You know what I mean? Like, he is that fighter. That's the kind of thing that he does, and his style has been built around stopping those guys, or guys who try that sort of game for so long. Let's talk about where these guys go from here. Obviously, we can't say for certain. Max Holloway says he's determined to defend his belt. My question for Max Holloway is, who the hell can beat him? Honestly, like, the way that he just beat Jose Aldo, knowing that he has that chin, right? That he was the first guy to go the distance with Conor McGregor. He took the meanest shots I have seen Jose Aldo throw in years, with no trouble. Like, his reaction was just sort of just a mild perturbance when he took a flying knee from Aldo to the face, or when he took a left hook right on the point of the chin. He was fine. No reaction whatsoever. And he has that stamina that I don't think anybody... again, we still haven't seen Max Holloway in the 4th and 5th rounds, but do you get the feeling that he's going to slow down? Like, every fight, he ended the 10 seconds of madness with Ricardo Lamas after a fast-paced fight without it breathing hard at all. So I get the sense that he can push that pace and keep his volume up into the 4th and 5th rounds. And then you have his mentality, his brain, his smarts, that he can adapt to basically, he can adapt to the best tactician in the history of the sport. He can adapt to one of the best technicians we've ever seen in MMA and find a way to knock him out. So who the hell can beat him?
Right now, I don't think anybody. I think he...
That's how I feel.
I think he comfortably beats Frankie Edgar, because again, this is one of those matchup things. Like, Frankie Edgar has gotten an inordinate amount of praise for his pace ever since he kind of outworked BJ Penn. But Frankie Edgar is a fake pace guy. I'm comfortable saying that. Frankie Edgar's pace is not outstanding. It never has been. He throws 12, 13 strikes a minute, which is at the upper end of average, not anywhere close to what we should consider high. He makes you think a lot, and back in the day, he used to move a lot. He still moves a fair bit. That is not pace. That is not work rate. And Max Holloway is a real pace guy. In the kind of pace fight that Frankie Edgar wants to push, Max Holloway is going to outwork him in every round, probably stuff most of his takedowns, and I would not be surprised if he finished Frankie as that fight went on. Though I think Frankie would make it the distance, just like a 49-45 kind of decision, with a 10-8 in there somewhere. Mm-hmm. And I think Frankie is the most qualified guy. I don't think there's any reason to think that Cub Swanson has any more success against Max the second time than he did the first time.
Nope.
Who else are we looking at in this division? I think Yair Rodriguez is interesting, but Max is just way more technically sound.
Mirsad Bektic obviously has what could be a rough stylistic matchup, but also probably can't match Max's pace if he can't finish him early.
Yeah, if you can't survive into the 3rd round with Darren Elkins' pace and that kind of grinding fight, Max is gonna beat you.
Two rounds of having nothing but success against Darren Elkins took a lot of the fight out of Mirsad Bektic. You know what I mean? Like, how is Max Holloway? Max Holloway is not going to give him 2 easy rounds, even if he's trying to control with takedowns and everything. It's going to be like Jędrzejczyk Gadelha, the way that Jędrzejczyk made Gadelha work for every single position for 2 rounds. I think it would look kind of similar to that fight. And then, I think, honestly, you have to go to the top lightweights to find somebody who I would favor to beat Max Holloway. Like, it might be Tony Ferguson. You know what I mean?
I think there are some sneaky tough matchups for Holloway at 145. Like, I think Duho Choi would be a surprisingly difficult fight for Holloway, though I would pick him to win it.
Yeah.
Just because Choi isn't going to be afraid to bang it out in the pocket with Holloway. If Holloway tries to play that swarming kind of game, Choi will be fine with that, and he'll just lace the combinations up the way that he did against Swanson. I think Holloway would still win it, but I think it would have to be a conservative Holloway, sticking and moving and working his clinch game and maybe trying to catch some kicks and hit takedowns. Like, Holloway would have to dig into his bag of tricks to win that fight.
Mm-hmm. Maybe somebody with the style of like a Cody Garbrandt, but he's probably way too small.
Yeah, the Garbrandt would be an interesting matchup, but again, not just the size, but the pace. Mm-hmm. Like, Garbrandt is way closer to, having seen Garbrandt and Holloway in person, Holloway probably outweighs Garbrandt by 25 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Holloway is, I was struck by this when I met him. Holloway is like a good sized dude. He's my height. Like, he's a legit 5'11", not a fake 5'11".
Mm-hmm.
And he's not thick, but he's solid. Like, he's a well-built guy. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he couldn't make 145 by the end of his career.
Yeah. I get the thing is like, I get the sense watching this fight, like, it's impossible to say for sure, and absolutely anything can happen. But if Holloway maintains this form and continues to improve on it, like, you get the sense watching this fight that we could very well be looking at the next featherweight GOAT. Like, honestly, with the run he's already put together in this division, beating Jose Aldo the way he did, adapting to Jose Aldo, out-adapting Jose Aldo the way he did. You get a different sense from this than you did from the McGregor fight with Aldo. That McGregor won that fight, and you couldn't then just go ahead and say, oh, this guy might really be like the next best featherweight we've ever seen. I get that feeling from Max Holloway. Mm-hmm. And at this point, like, honestly, I think that you give him a year or two to put on a little more weight or whatever, I think he would probably beat McGregor in a rematch. I think he has the style to do it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't think that McGregor is ever going to want to fight Holloway again, but probably for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. Like, McGregor's the guy who moves on to the next challenge. There's maybe a little bit of deeply buried fear in the way that he approaches the fight game, where he just, once he overcomes something, like, he faces his fear and then he just doesn't ever have to deal with it again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I think Tony Ferguson would be the worst case matchup, just because he's so much bigger. Like, Ferguson probably has, honest to God, 30 pounds on Max Holloway.
And he's
Ferguson
insanely
is
tough. He has an insanely quick pace. I mean, the way that Tony Ferguson fought Dos Anjos in Mexico City, that spells trouble for somebody like Max Holloway. But again, like, we're talking about a big lightweight. You have to go way up in weight to really find somebody who I would favor to beat Max Holloway at this point. So it's crazy.
I think it's going to be somebody like Bektic. I think it would give him a tough fight, but I would still pick Holloway. Somebody like Brian Ortega would be interesting if Ortega continues to get better as a striker, just because he's so tough and just has that doesn't give a fuckness type of thing. And if Holloway made a mistake on the ground, Ortega has the kind of style where he could immediately capitalize and hit like a lightning fast out of nowhere submission.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would be interesting, but still I would pick Holloway to dismantle him.
Sure.
Like, yeah. And anyway, he's injured, so
yeah,
I don't know. Like, that's
what I'm saying, right? You look at this division, and first of all, you look at it and you're like, okay, well, Holloway's beat most of the guys in the top already on his way to the title. He's on a 10-fight winning streak. And then you look at the rest, and you're like, who? I don't know. He's just had a very convincing run. That's the thing. It wasn't like McGregor had good wins at featherweight. I don't think they were as bad as people said, but it was Max Holloway's run at featherweight has been utterly convincing. You have seen him fight a wide variety of styles. Really, I think all we haven't seen is a really, really powerful wrestler like Mirsad Bektic. But we have seen his wrestling get better and better with each fight. We have seen his grappling get better and better. We've seen everything about him improve by leaps and bounds, and we have seen his composure and his confidence come along with it. So it is really hard to imagine. How about Jose Aldo? What? First of all, what do you think comes next? If you have a gut feeling of any kind, and what would you like to see him do next?
My guess is, honestly, I think Aldo will be done. I think Aldo will retire.
You think so?
Yeah, I don't. That's what my gut says. If he sticks around, I don't think there's anything for him at featherweight. Like, I think he would be best off taking a fight at 155, like an interesting matchup fight at 155. Because
fight Anthony Pettis.
I'm sorry?
Fight Anthony Pettis. Let that happen finally.
Yeah, for sure. Fight him at 150 or 155. And if I honestly think this is the phase. Aldo has wanted those money fights his whole career. I think free of the belt and free of the pressure of needing the belt, I think Aldo might finally find those money fights that he wanted.
Yeah, I'm not holding out hope that he will go for those. I just don't know. Aldo is he's such a hard personality to like wrap your head around. He's quite reclusive and quiet, and keeps a lot to himself. It's very difficult to know what he's thinking. And I think in some ways he's a very emotional guy. So it's kind of hard to know, like, how will this affect him mentally if he knows, like, this is what his dream has been, is to hold this belt for all this time, and now it's gone. And there's the way the fight ended, like, it doesn't feel, even though Aldo had 2 really good rounds, it did have a feeling of inevitability to it. Like, that was going to happen eventually in that fight. But as for me, I would really like to see Aldo go to lightweight. Like, I think he could actually, if he has 2 or 3 fights left in him, if he has the passion for those, like I said, I think if you're looking for guys to beat somebody like Nurmagomedov, who honestly has a better guaranteed shot than Aldo at stopping that style?
I would pay all the fucking money to watch Aldo fight Khabib. I think Khabib would maybe find a way to win that fight, but I don't know. Like, I want to see it.
He's a different breed, a much like a better, possibly a more dangerous and bigger breed of the style that Aldo knows very well how to beat. So it's like, yeah, we have new wrinkles for both guys. I mean, you look at the lightweight top 10, there's tons of guys that Aldo could beat. And with the speed and power that he still showed in that fight, like, he would have some advantages at lightweight. I think he would. The chin might be a problem going up in weight, but I think he'd be a lot harder to hit because of the speed.
But it's not like 155 is full of big-time punchers.
No, yeah, exactly.
Like, it's kind of weird that a weight class like that is, for when you compare it with the weight classes on either side of it, doesn't have like these big punchers dominating the top 10. Like, even Tony Ferguson, who is a dangerous fighter, is not a big puncher. Edson Barboza is not a big puncher. Khabib does not seem to be a huge puncher.
Can you imagine?
Even Eddie Alvarez, I think, is kind of overrated as a puncher.
Oh yeah, he's a respectable puncher. There's not a ton of huge guys with huge power. Can you imagine Jose Aldo versus Edson Barboza? I mean,
I can imagine that, and I would like to see it.
You can, but then people will sense your arousal, so best not to imagine it while we're being recorded. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not holding out for it to happen. It's very hard for me to say, like, number one Jose Aldo fan, but it's very hard for me to predict what he's going to do and what he's thinking. Like, it's hard for anyone to say that, but if he does want to go to lightweight, I think we both agree there's some good shit for him there. So we'll see. Yep. Max Holloway may be holding that featherweight belt for a very long time, and time will tell where Jose Aldo goes from here. It was a little bit of a tough one to watch for me, but certainly compelling. And now that I've calmed down and gotten my emotions together, I am very excited for the blessed era. I cannot wait to see where Max Holloway goes next. Let's take a break, Pat, and when we come back, we are going to talk about, just touch on a couple other fights from this card, and if we have to, we will say between 5 and 10 words about Derrick Lewis versus Marquardt, which is coming up next weekend. But first, the rest of UFC 212 after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back to Heavy Hands, where we have bricks for fists, but bladders the size of walnuts. Pat, you and I both have a tendency of talking for about 20 minutes, and then both of us, I guess because we drink so much while we're waiting for the other person to talk, we both got to go.
You think these lovely tenor voices just stay this way by themselves? Nah, homie. You gotta
wet that whistle. Throat. You gotta keep that whistle nice and moist. Let's talk about the rest of this card here. We've got Gadelha versus Kowalkiewicz. You had some interesting thoughts on this one, Pat.
I refuse to be gaslit into believing that Kowalkiewicz is better than she actually is. It is a fucking gaslighting. I mean that seriously. Like, she had 7 good minutes against Rose Namajunas and took over when Namajunas kind of broke, and I give her credit for that. She is a durable, rugged, game fighter with a lot of toughness and a lot of willingness to stay in there and hang out. But she is not a good technical fighter in any fucking phase of the fight. In any phase, except maybe her takedown defense and her clinch game. Like, she is... Because she spent so long as kind of a shitty outside striker, people give shitty outside strikers more credit for being technical than they actually deserve.
Yeah, we talked about that last week, that anyone who fights on the outside, people just assume that's the technical way to fight, and Kowalkiewicz kind of is proof against that.
Yeah, she is getting better. She's better than she was, and she still has a lot of room to get better yet. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying she's a bad fighter. She's very clearly a top 10 strawweight and probably a top 5 strawweight. But she is not as good as she has been given credit for being. And the way that she handled the takedown and scramble against Gadelha is the best evidence possible of this. That was a rookie mistake that led to her getting her back taken and choked out. Like, it was an absolute rookie mistake. And, like, that's – I mean, and to me that kind of sums up the gap between the way that Kowalkiewicz has been talked about by fans and media and commentators and what she actually is as a fighter. Like, she got laced by a couple of counters. She got into the clinch twice. The first time she ate 2 big elbows. That's supposed to be her core competency, remember? Like, that's the area where we're giving her the most credit. She gets laced by 2 elbows and kind of rocked. And then the next time they get into the clinch, Gadelha chains together 3 takedowns and gets her down. Like, and then the fight was over. And that was it. Like,
so I'll reiterate something that you did touch on before. I think she's getting better. I think arguably the least technical aspect of her game is the one that is lauded the most, which is her range striking. I think she has a lot of trouble, or has had a lot of trouble historically, moving her feet and punching at the same time. We've both seen, when she's rooted on the ground, in the clinch, her opponent's cornered against the fence, Kowalkiewicz is actually a pretty strong and powerful fighter. But you would never know that watching her fight from range because she's so uncoordinated with her striking. That's getting better. Her feet are usually in a better position now. Her footwork was leaps and bounds better in this fight than it was like when she fought Mizuki Inoue, for example, where she would move one foot and then the other foot an equal distance, something she never used to do. She was shuffling, moving the way a fighter is supposed to move. Punches getting a little crisper. She's starting to learn to deliver some of that power at range. But the thing with Kowalkiewicz, you hear that, Pat?
I do.
You hear that helicopter outside?
Love that background noise.
Slice of life. Jesus Christ. It's getting louder. I thought they were already right overhead. The thing about Kowalkiewicz is that I think she's better than she is, if you know what I mean. Like her level of technique is not nearly as high as people advertise for her style. But she's really gritty and really mean. And that allows her to do things that she wouldn't be able to do otherwise. I think that was the reason that she beat Rose Namajunas, is that she's just a dog, and she did not allow Namajunas to be comfortable once she found an opening. But I think it was also probably the reason that she got submitted so easily by Gadelha. I think she had too much swagger on the ground. She's like, I can just stand up. You know what I mean? So like when she was in control against Namajunas, she out-grappled her after knocking her down with an uppercut. Like, she flowed on top of her. She kept Namajunas from getting anything going. But when she wasn't in control here against Gadelha, she got out-grappled because she was sloppy, and she was too eager to stand back up. And, she didn't respect the jiu-jitsu of Gedalia. Like she really did make a rookie mistake, as you said, trying to stand up by just giving up her back and just trying to stand. And then even after Gedalia got her back, she still then tried to continue standing up. She put a hand on the ground and, just gave her neck.
Yeah. I'm being a little overly harsh here. It's just like, this is a reaction to, like, I feel like she got so much credit for getting her ass kicked against Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Oh, and when she lost everything but 1 minute of the fight?
I mean, everything but 30 seconds of the fight.
Sure.
And even that, I still don't think that was enough to win her that round. I know I'm in the extreme minority on that, but I still think Jędrzejczyk won the round in which she got knocked down. So, it's just frustrating to me. Like, Andrade, people are like, oh, well, she was durable, and with Kovacevic, it's like, oh, but she was competitive. It's like she was not more competitive than Andrade was.
Yeah, she had one better moment, and honestly, Andrade landed a big shot too. It's just that it swelled up half of Jędrzejczyk's face instead of making her legs wobble. But basically, both women had about as much success as one another.
Yeah. Now, the flip side to this is, like, not talking about Kovacevic, but about Gedalia. I thought Gedalia looked great. Like, she's a sharp counterpuncher. Her game is coming together in kind of broad outlines. She's even better in the clinch, if that were possible. She was already a nasty, like, strong clinch fighter. And one thing that is she's probably the best athlete in this division. It's either her or Andrade. And I don't know if she ever beats Joanna Jędrzejczyk, but I know that there's nobody else who's going to have a better shot of doing it than Gedalia. Because she is, at least at 115 pounds. Like, she is everything she's cracked up to be and more, and she's still getting better. So
she's going to be
there's a lot to like about Gedalia.
She's going to be like the Frankie Edgar to Jose Aldo or the Dan Cormier to John Jones. She's going to be, I think, the person who would be the champion if not for the champion in this division, probably for some time. She is very, very solid. And I hope to see her. It was hard to say in this fight to make any solid claims about improvement because, again, I think Kovacevic largely lost because of her own mistakes. And so it's hard to know how much credit to give to Gedalia for that. But I would like to see her continue to improve. She moved away from Nova União, which could be a bit worrying, but she now seems to have a camp that's really built around her, which is maybe what she needs, is like a smaller team where she is the center of the focus. And the training camp is solely hers. So we'll see where she goes from here. But yeah, Claudia Gedalia, she's the bona fide number 2. And she's unlucky enough to be in a division with one of the best number 1s in the sport. So it is what it is. Let us spare a few words for Borrachinha. Paulo, boy, what are his other 16 names?
Paulo and Paulo. I like Borrachinha.
Yeah, Paulo Enrique Costa. We'll call him Borrachinha. He actually impressed me more than I expected to be impressed by him. And it's not like I think the things I knew about him going into this fight are still true. He's a much better fighter offensively than he is defensively. He's prone to gassing. We didn't know that before this fight, but the big muscular miniature Uberim who knocks everyone out in the first round is probably not the picture of the guy you'd expect to be really strong going into the second. But I think what we learned is that he is composed enough and disciplined enough that tendency to gas is not going to be as big a problem as it is, for example, for someone like Oluwale Bamgbose.
Yeah, there's a lot of maturity in how Borrachinha fights. I think he's basically a swarmer.
Yeah.
By nature, and not so much a pressure fighter, though I think he pressures pretty well. I think at the end of the day, he's a guy who wants to tee off on you when you make a mistake.
Yeah.
That is the definition of a swarmer.
He gets backed off too easily for someone who is like a steady pressure fighter. He's more of an Andrade type.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and now that's something he can improve. He's still extremely young in his career. He's got a lot of room to get better. The sky is close to the limit for him. Like, I think he will always have a little bit of a problem with his gas tank, but in terms of the rest of his skills, like, he showed off pretty decent takedown defense fundamentals here. There were, like, he did a good job of getting his hips back. He knew when to sit down on the underhooks. Like, he knew when to crack down on an overhook. Like, there were good signs there. He's raw in that regard, but the basics are there. His combination punching is really good. He goes head and body. He picks his shots really well. He's obviously powerful, like ridiculously powerful. He's got great, fantastic killer instinct. And he knows how to back off when he's not going to get the finish. Like that. Yeah. That's a key thing.
Yeah, and some credit has to go to his corner. I don't know who the man with the do-rag was in Borrachinha's corner, but he owned Borrachinha in the corner way harder than Barboza did in the round preceding that corner session. he completely just did not let him off the hook. And like, I think it worked. He gave him like a drill sergeant treatment. He was like, you come out disciplined, you do not get reckless, all right? He's tired, but he's still dangerous. Like, he knew Borrachinha went hard for the finish at one point in the first round, wasted a lot of energy, and had to stay composed, had to stay tight, had to be careful, and he ordered him to do so, and he did it. He did it really well, and that's a good sign to me. There was also the fact, I wish I could remember who it was, and I apologize for forgetting your name, but not your name, but just who said it. Somebody on Twitter pointed out that during the fight, Borrachinha was mocking Barboza for being tired, which is, I think, quite savvy, because he was as tired as Barboza. I really believe that. I think that after that first round, both dudes, they're one-round fighters. They were both exhausted. But it was a lot harder to tell because of the way that Borrachinha was moving technically and efficiently, and he sort of heightened that experience for Barboza, or dug his mental hole a little deeper for him by emphasizing the fact that he knew he was tired, without letting on that he himself was feeling the same exhaustion. So yeah, there was a lot to like about this performance. I doubt that Borrachinha is going to be like, there are always going to be tough style matchups for him, but he does have a lot of potential and showed, I think, more maturity than we should have expected before this fight. More maturity than I expected anyway. Let's talk about Marlon Moraes before we wrap up, and we will, again, as I said, say 5 to 10 words about Lewis versus Hunt before the close of the show. Marlon Moraes, I think most people thought deserved the nod over Rafael Assunção. It was certainly a very close fight, and Assunção, did credit to his reputation as somebody who is just very difficult to look really good against. I did think that Marlon Moraes edged it, though. I thought he probably earned the decision and was a little surprised when they gave it to Rafa. Did you feel the same way?
I was a little surprised, yeah, but not especially so.
I found it hard to complain. I mean...
Yeah, just not that much happened for long stretches of the fight, and when not that much happens, it's hard to be surprised whatever the outcome ends up being, you know? That's always the way I feel about fights like this. Like, I wouldn't have been surprised if the Marquardt Belfort fight went either way either. I mean, like, it's the nature of a slow paced fight is like when you don't have much to go on, what a judge remembers is hard to predict. Are they going to remember that succession of low kicks? Are they going to remember that one right hand to the head? How are they going to weigh them? Like, there ends up being a lot of variance in terms of what judges choose to score in slow-paced fights. That's my considered opinion there.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed that Moraes let Assunção teach him all those lessons.
Right.
Like, I was disappointed in Moraes.
I was going to say the same. I think Assunção deserves a lot of the credit for making it that slow-paced fight. That is his pace, and it's not Moraes' pace. And it was Assunção who convinced Moraes to fight a lot slower, to throw a lot less. I thought he did a really nice job of countering, and in a couple moments he had where he really needed something to teach Moraes a lesson, he put the pressure on him a little bit, and kind of stayed close, and would surprise him with a good shot, and then, back off. Assunção is, in this division, like the split decision king, which is not a good thing. It's not great to be the guy who wins a bunch of really close fights that are so close the judges can't agree on who got it. But it's also what makes him really difficult. He is the spoiler supreme at bantamweight. It's very difficult to look good against him. And we were both hoping that Moraes would be the exception, but he was not.
Yeah, what's disappointing about this is that it's not like you chalk this up with Moraes to him being a young fighter who still has a ton left to learn.
Yeah.
Like, this is the Marlon Moraes you see is the Marlon Moraes you're going to get. This dude has been fighting professionally for 10 years. He's in his late 20s. He's probably at or close to the end of his physical prime. He may get a little bit better still. He's
still refining, but he's
some things here and there.
He's done making the big changes.
Yeah, but this is who he is. And if you can't, in your UFC debut, figure out this guy is going to throw counters at me, I've got to find some way to work through that to produce the volume that I need to win this on the scorecards, then, I think there's a pretty hard ceiling on how good he's going to be. That doesn't mean he's not going to win fights, and there are more favorable matchups out there for him than a Sun Tzu, but, this was his chance, and he kind of blew it. A lot of, not to take anything away from a Sun Tzu, but, there were ways that Moraes could have worked through this, and he didn't.
Yeah, I find it a little hard to be too hard on him but I'm president of the Rafael Assunção fan club. I really respect what he does, and I come into this fight knowing that it was not, it was not an easy fight for Moraes. I thought it was a good test for him. I don't think he passed that test with flying colors, although I did think he probably deserved the decision, but. Not many people are going to slow Moraes down the way a Sun Tzu could. Certainly the top guys are going to have that ability, the top three. But personally, I didn't really think that Moraes was going to beat the Garbrandts and Dillashaw's and Cruzes of the world anyway. I kind of thought he would be like a staple number 6 guy or something like that, like right around that top 5 level. And I still think that that's certainly a very, very possibility. It's eminently possible is what I'm saying. But Sun Tzu did what he does. He went in there, he made somebody look bad. He was very hard to hit clean. He was very hard to win rounds against because he is just he's the B- version of Jose Aldo. He's a very smart tactician, and it's just really difficult to make something work against him for long. He will figure it out. So it is what it is. Marlon Moraes will live to fight another day, and I'm sure there are still some very good fights for him in this division. Can you imagine? Somebody suggested Moraes versus the loser of Rivera Almeida. I would watch that. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, this is not like a knock on him as in terms of just being a guy in the UFC, but for those of us who thought maybe he could be a little bit more than a staple top 10 fighter, then this is a pretty harsh wake-up call in that regard. Because if Rafael Assunção can put you off with his counter-punching, Cody Garbrandt's going to knock you out.
Yeah, basically.
Or TJ Dillashaw is going to swarm you and win a 30-26 decision. And I really thought coming into this, based on what I'd seen from Moraes over the years, that he could have been competitive with those kinds of guys. So this is also my read was wrong, That's a little bit how I view this. My read on what Moraes is wrong.
Yeah, again, he didn't look bad, but it's hard to look at this and not say, he kind of failed this test.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a benchmark in a sense, and you fight a gatekeeper, either they close the gates in your face, or you find yourself on the other side. And I think the gates got shut this time. Let's talk about Derrick Lewis versus Mark Hunt. It's happening. Okay, bye. Thanks for listening to Heavy Hands.
Yeah. I don't really have anything to say about this.
It sucks. It's not a good card. I'm sorry, guys. We will hit you with a fun bonus episode, but I don't think we're going to have time to talk about Lewis Hunt.
We have time. We're choosing not to. Yeah. Let's be clear about that.
I don't have time that I care to devote to it. I have no time that is so meaningless to me that I want to spend it talking about this card. It's not the worst card I've ever seen, but it's very, very far from the best. And it's going to be a 6-fight Fox Sports 1 main card with a heavyweight main event, which is either going to be boring or depressing or both. I will say, Ion Cutelaba and Frank Waston Jr., Luis Enrique, they are fighting on this card. So there is one thing that I will make sure to watch, whether live or after the fact. That is a light heavyweight banger right there. But for the most part, it's not a great card. Yeah. It is what it is. UFC 212, though, was satisfying and heartbreaking for some of us, and uplifting for others, and fascinating in many, many ways. We will be talking about the fallout from that main event in particular for a very long time, and I think there were a lot of impacts on the futures of several divisions than we realized going into that event that we ended up seeing. We now know, I think, how far Marlon Moraes can go. We have a better idea of how far Paulo Borrachinha can go. And I think we have had it reasserted that Claudia Gadelha is the number 2 in the women's strawweight division. Other than that, that is it for our show today. Before we wrap up, Pat, why don't you tell me what you have coming out this week?
Not a whole lot. I have a yeah, are you gonna laugh at me for that, Connor? You gonna laugh at me for the
Nope,
not too much?
Lips are zipped.
I could tell you were getting ready. You were winding up for it. I could hear the wheels turning over there. No, I actually am not doing that much this week. I released a piece on Deadspin on Monday on Jose Aldo and Max Holloway called "The End of Jose Aldo." I kind of broke down what Holloway did to win the fight and kind of the broader meaning of it and where both guys stand moving forward. I'm really proud of this. I think it's one of the better pieces I've ever written. So check that out. Otherwise, I am releasing a new Fall of Rome on Thursday on the kind of barbarian successor kingdoms to the Roman Empire writ large. And then I'm recording for next week an interview with the fantastic Liz Brunig of the Washington Post on St. Augustine, because she did graduate work on Augustine, and she's super smart and super interesting. And I'm very excited to talk about Augustine and his times.
Very cool. You say not that much. Going? It's still 3 things. Which is like more than, more than my average. So.
This is a deeply busy week. I have a lot of stuff going on. It's just not stuff that is coming out in
right
the next 7-day period.
I see.
So
that makes sense. Well, keep your eyes peeled for my Sherdog preview. Yes, I had to write a Sherdog preview of UFC Auckland. There are a couple highlights there if you got nothing else to do on a Saturday, or if you're lucky enough to be in the local time zone, you might have a very enjoyable Sunday morning with this card. And there are some highlights for you guys, so be sure to check that out. I also will have my own piece on Jose Aldo coming out this week. Not so much a technical breakdown of the fight, but being a huge, longtime fan of Aldo and feeling like I have a really good understanding, as best as anyone who doesn't really personally know him can, of his style. I wanted to write about sort of the pressures of being a defending champion, the weight of greatness, if you will, and how I think that over time that sort of built up. And you could look at this fight as the culmination of years of that pressure building on one of the greatest we've ever seen, and a true changing of the guard. And I think that's probably all I'll have coming out this week. If I can find it in me to do something else on Lewis versus Hunt, I will. But let's be honest, Pat, I probably won't. So make sure you check those things out. And a second time, I should say, thank you guys for listening to this episode. Get at us on social media if you have questions, comments, or whatever. You can find Pat at Patrick_Wyman on Twitter. And you can find me at BoxingBush, BUSCH, also on thetwitter.com. And that's about...
Connor, we left out our weekly discussion of some obscure historical thing.
Oh, yeah. What do you got?
Do you want to talk about German mercenaries real quick?
Sure. Why not?
So, for those of our listeners who are not aware, both Connor and I share a yen for a particular kind of German mercenary called Landsknechts. Who started being active around the end of the 15th century and were a thing throughout the 16th century. They wore very flashy, sexualized clothing.
Oh yeah,
like a lot of bright colors, big cod pieces, and they were an interesting phenomenon. They fought like the Swiss pikemen did, but they also used more guns, and they used giant two-handed swords called Zweihanders. But they're fascinating because they don't really they fit kind of at the margins of society, but at the same time they were allowed to break sumptuary laws like regarding dress. So they were like marginal people, but also ones who didn't have to obey certain rules. They're just fascinating, absolutely fascinating people.
I have a fun etymology fact related to the word Landsknecht. It essentially means servant of the land. Knecht meaning a servant. English is the only language that I know of in Europe in which the word for a knight has nothing to do with horsemanship. In basically every other language, in Spanish you have a caballero, in French a chevalier, in
German it's Ritter.
Yeah, Ritter in German, which means rider. I think in Italian it's cavaliere or something like that. English, it comes from the word knecht, which means a servant. So England is the only country in which being a knight, the focus seems on the word was more about who you served and not the fancy shit you owned. Because a horse, of course, was the sports car of its day. More than a sports car. A horse was basically the value of a modern house in its day. It was very, very difficult to own one. So there's our historical exchange.
That has been History Minute with Connor and Patrick.
Your history/etymology minute for this episode of Heavy Hands. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed that almost as much as you enjoyed the rest of the show, if not even more. And if you want more shit like that, go check out Pat's podcasts, Fall of Rome, and we don't have a name yet for the new one, but that Early Modern History podcast will be coming out soon as well. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time. If you came here today for the finer points of face punching and history, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.